like screwdrivers and Bloody Marys and things. And then my grandparents always drank cordials, you know. It's amazing. The meaning of fall. Gold leaf fell to the rake and the fire. Leaping headlong into those upholstered yards, we couldn't tell rags from riches, loving a little trash by nature, having an orange crush. But goods are made by loss, and love becomes a set of pet names, all diminutive. And as for God, we saw it was the dark that made the stars. As time went by, the jeweled movement of the loan shark's car would utterly impoverish the sky. The New World. There's a word in this that I don't know if most people know. It's G-H-O-T-I, which is a constructed word. It's a word that's used to illustrate how stupid English pronunciation is, because you take the G-H from enough, and you take the O from women, and you take the T-I from nation, and you get fish. And it's spelled G-H-O-T-I. That's that word. And I'll spell it out because I don't want to say it so much, you know. I mean, when you see it on a page, it doesn't look like fish. So, the New World. Her daughter, at this very moment, writes out G-H-O-T-I on a schoolroom slate. Was there a day when blackboards were not green? Will she remember her mother tongue? A mile away, the woman wonders. Steam is rising from the simmered head of an enormous fish. The eye clouds over. Underneath, a small globe always hardens into chalk. She knows from good stock of the past. And what her husband at this very moment drops from the breakwater on a line into the sky and through the underlying green toward deepest black is like a highly polished IUD. I got preoccupied with letters. I mean, first it was bad enough that I loved, you know, that I got fixed on words, but I had a word fix. But then it got to be, you know, then it got to be syllables, and then it got to be letters, and so IUD, it's down to ID almost, I, or OD, maybe. OD is going to be the last. But part of that, somewhere in that process, I was really preoccupied with words that we double up, and you see that in this poem called The Latest. Like, you know how, like, you say there, or here, but they don't mean the same thing. The fact that you double them doesn't work the same way, because when you say there, it's consolatory, but when you say here, it's consternatory. It's consternation, and that's consolation. Like that, it's just like in New York State when they made a poll and asked people about whether they wanted legalized gambling. They said, yeah, if it wasn't in their hometown, you know, if it wasn't near them. So it's like there, you pat on the head is all right, but here, no, you know, it's no. Or like the way people say, you know, so happy or so strong, but if you ask, are you happy, are you strong, you say so, you mean less so, not twice as much so. I mean, that doubling up of words to me is really, there's something real strange about that. Or that what people say, dear, and that means they're worried, not that they are affectionate so much. It doesn't mean they're more affectionate, they're worried, like the way care is double, you know, care. You care for something, or you care for it. You'll see how that enters into this poem, The Latest. When word is born of word, and love of have and hold alone, then everyone wants a mine of his own. The ring in the ear is a sign, and so is the ring in the nose. Even the moon is real estate. Even the stars have agents. I belong to you, you say, and soon we'll make a galaxy of daughters, 100,000 sons. The tellers of truth, the writers of note are found in banks, and mothers of mothers, having made their grands, meet in supermarkets to compare the wallet photos of the latest in inheritors. They purse their lips. They say, my. It's one of sort of my mortal fears about growing old is that I'll say that, you know. But on the other hand, maybe a kind of wisdom, like you can't say my anything else. It's that you know, that word. Probably what writers say when they get old is my word, you know, a lot or something. So my miso form of that. This is a poem called Damage. I think also one of the reasons that I started writing poems in which I started thinking more about the what of poems than the how was that I didn't have time, I thought. About 2 years ago, I had like all these brain tests and stuff, and they said things like in the test, if I moved too much, I would have permanent brain damage and stuff like that, So I thought, I move all the time, When am I going to better write my best poems now real quick before I go to the hospital for the tests? And that was happening at the time of the Phelan. This poem, you see not only evidence, sort of maybe a little more economy of language, maybe a little more concern with the what, but also just in terms of content, my preoccupation at that time. Damage. Where you suddenly begin to see in the world whatever is happening to you, the way we refer to the world. Evergreens are churning black as wind. The trouble goes deep. The doctor has a drill of light for your eye. You burn in the dark and you weep splinters. Eye of the storm, you cannot fill this hole. It wants the world, a negative of a satellite or likeness in a lake. You moon, you pine, you don't see why. Always far away, someone who could have loved you is awake, casually watching night begin to fall, day begin to break. Hag, a poem that came because I was reading the OED one day, casually as I will, for light entertainment. And there was this thing under hag, the word hag, it said that one of the old definitions was a kind of light said to appear at night on horses' manes and men's hair. Which seemed amazing to me, given what we think it means now. That mostly it seemed amazing to me that the glow attached itself to men and horses, but the word stayed with the women, what I got to take away from it, was not the glow. Hag. Horse gets into me, its mane electric and its hoofs drumming up business. Men get into me, having the hair to go outside. I call for order, but the cops are cut below. My songs grow fur and hide. Horse shoots up the spine, the arms of stars, stopping what moves in its tracks, stilling what stones, owning what stalls. Combed for romance, the moon will always strand its caretakers. The groom stands up in bed, ready to bridle at the slightest word. At night, the fence is down, the animals steal from a newlywed's side and wander where a woman cannot come, who kept her word but gave away her light. New glasses. A beautiful woman brings you fortune. That is why they say she's fetching. She alone can be herself, however close the others come. But yours is the mirror rich in irony. It will not pay. All you can make of yourself is the second person, someone once removed. They tell you beauty talks, and you shut up. Dead eye in your new glasses, you see the red they spoke of. Now you have your mother's hair, how she looked as she lay in the box. Form. I'll just read a few more. Form. We were wrong to think form a frame, a still shot of the late beloved, or the pot thrown around water. We wanted to hold what we had. But the clay contains the breaking, and the man is dead. The scrapbook has him, and the form of life is emotion. So from all this sadness, the bed being touched, the mirror being filled, we learn what carrying on is for. We move. We are moved. It runs in the family. For the life of us, us, we cannot stand to stay.
「
Form. Here's the poem that shows you how fixed I was on syllables for a while. And it's called that, Syllables. The island doesn't sink. It's not a ship or spirits. Doesn't try to keep up, doesn't care. This comforts the lonely man. He thinks like them he's given up the ghost of likeness, line and claws. But all along the shoals of mated shapes, the boats will always growl and lurch and run aground. It's farther out that his survival finds its form, where small and fat and striped and never to be touched, they sing their whole notes, heard or not, their boy low lub bob bell. I'll just read 3 more. This one is called The Nymph to Narcissus, which came of reading Ovid. Reading the Metamorphoses is great. I want to tell you, don't be put off by it. It's beautiful. I had taken a little Latin when I was in high school, and it helps a lot because many of the translations, the Victorian translations, sound Victorian, right? And it seems to be true, and it's great to look at the Latin forms of things and recognize the connections latent in the poetry. It's gorgeous stuff. I mean, the whole thing about the Narcissus myth that I didn't even know about was about the nymph who was in love with Narcissus. I mean, everybody knows about Narcissus in love with Narcissus, and I mean, I had even made a mistake about that. You think that Narcissus was in love with what was too easily available to him, with what was his, with that image of himself. But the curse that was put on him was that he should love what he could never have. And that would be the one thing, that would be the one image that he couldn't. And so that a whole lot of the myth is him actually looking in this reflection and putting his hands on it and having it disappear as soon as he touches it. The way the self does. I mean, the way that the notion of the self disappears as soon as you try to grab it somehow. I'm real preoccupied with making that second person out of yourself. How, we put babies up to mirrors and say, that's you. And then they're supposed to know to say, I see, or something, which person. There's something of that mirroring here, and the way the nymph in the story fell in love with Narcissus, and he was looking at himself and stuff. And she was a nymph who had been cursed in another way. She had been cursed because she chased after Zeus, I think, and Zeus's wife got mad at her and put a curse on her, right? And the curse was that she could only repeat the words that other people said to her. She could never initiate a conversation herself. She could never say it in the first place. And her name was Echo, this nymph. So she was standing there saying to Narcissus, whatever he said. If he said, who's here? He hears her in the woods, right? He says, who's here? And she says, here. And then he says, and she comes and puts her arms around his neck and everything, and he says, I'll die before I let you love me. And she says, love me. And it's this really sort of pathetic exchange, almost partly mirroring. It plays on mirrors a lot. The whole myth is beautiful in terms of mirrors and reflection, because it's about self-love and selflessness. But it's opposites. And so when she mirrors his language, she says just the opposite, even though she's using just the tag ends of his words. And there's that odd sort of play of matching and of opposition and the self-made opposite. Anyway, the nymph to Narcissus. We invented one another, the way water and air are intimate, the way reflection is a lonely art. If you're smart, you know better ways to suffer, know yourself insufferable. Is this true? Is this true? It was for beauty that we did each other in. You longed for no one. I was reduced to double talk. This is no way to live. Of course I turned to nothing but bones and a voice, then nothing but voice. Of course you couldn't stand the sight, your ground. In love, the secret is the self. In death, it is the echo of the secret. there are little allusions in this to the myth too, which is when he was born, when Narcissus was born, his mother took him to the oracle to see if he would live to a ripe old age, and the oracle said, if he never know himself. So that knowing, if you're smart, you know better ways to suffer, know yourself. Insufferable is this true, is partly an allusion to that. And then there's a line almost taken directly from Ovid, just to show you how the poet, the line I think is most beautiful in here is Ovid's, is turning to, he says that what happened when they couldn't have the objects of their love, both of these people were frustrated in the objects of their love. Both of them in Ovid is wonderful. I mean, in the Victorian translation, both of them waste away. I mean, that's what happens. Narcissus wastes away and becomes a little flower, and Echo wastes away and remains now in woods and dales as the echo of your voice when you yell. But there's this process by which she wasted away, which was turning to nothing but bones and a voice, then nothing but voice. Which is great poetry, beautiful poetry, and it's right there in the Ovid. It's beautiful if you get a chance to look at it. Two more. Retired school teacher. Wishful thinking. Brilliant planets float in that black lake. She is losing her vision. Her pupils are old. All night long she stays up trying to remember an animal from the past, imaginary, made to swim in sight, to burn in tears, to turn the heavens and the seas around. On the coast of her youth, light years away, she loved to let the waves come over her. She talks some sense into herself. Sleep, sleep. It is much too late for children. That sinks in. Deep in the dream and far from all attachments, she feels the first of the starfish touch. And this last one, Message at Sunset for Bishop Berkeley. Bishop Berkeley sort of was one of my favorites when I was reading those guys. Partly because, I mean, when you're a kid, you love that literal sense of the world. I mean, you know how when you were a kid, I don't know if your father told you, but my father told me a lot of really things that made it hard for me to understand true science thereafter, like who turned the light on in the refrigerator was a little guy named Yehudi, when you're that helps. But also, he told me things like that the moon followed you, like when you were in the car. And it was true. You would look out, and as you were driving, the moon would always just be coming along right after, so that you thought the world was about you. It was really egocentric, and they loved that when you did that. And then they could, they laughed adultly over your misconceptions ever after. Or there's a story I read somewhere that somebody said that a kid went up on his first flight in an airplane, turned to his father and said, "When do we start getting smaller?" Which is a beautiful, beautiful thing. You suddenly realize what he expected, what he had always seen and what he thought. Anyway, that kind of, then Berkeley comes along. Then you study Berkeley and you realize that the world isn't, what it's a matter of your senses that makes it seem that way. That the reality of the world in Berkeley is the perceivers, not the perceived objects. It's, he said, esse est percipi. To be is to be perceived. He's the guy that said, if a tree falls in the woods, nobody's there to hear it, did it make a noise, right? And it raises the question of the substance of the world without the agents of perception there. And of course, I go obstinately for the moon following us myself. I like to argue with dead guys anyway. This poem, Message at Sunset for Bishop Berkeley. How could nothing turn so gold? You say my eyelid shuts the sky. In solid dark, I see stars as perforations, loneliness as blues, what isn't as a heavy weight, what is as nothing if it's not ephemeral. But still the winter world could turn your corneas to ice. Let sense be made. The summer sun will drive its splinters straight into your brain. Let sense be made. I'm saying vision isn't insight buried at last in the first person's eye. You should see it. The sky is really something. Thank you, people. Thank you, thank you. Thanks a lot, Rangers, for it. I don't have change, but
And
I got a batch of books.
Stay around for a little while. We have wine and cheese and talk to the poet. Do anyone else?